Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to go relatively quickly unless I address you, Mr. Trachtenberg. I apologize. My questions are directed to the Deputy Secretary. I would hope that you would appreciate the fact that I have a finite amount of time. And if it's a yes or no question, give a yes or no answer. On the Sudan, I've also been there. I would commend this administration for the progress made in that country, and I point that out by virtue of the fact that we've heard so many doom and gloom stories from those who don't understand the Vandenberg concept that politics stops at the water edge. Is Sudan historically, in the last 30 years, been a kind of bad actor?
Yes.
And so have they also been listed on the state sponsors of terror list?
They still are.
At some point, they were accused of harboring a guy named Osama bin Laden, correct?
They did indeed.
Okay, and they harbored FBI bomb plotters as well back in the 90s, correct?
Many bad actors.
And so when I was there, I had the opportunity to meet with Mr. Atta, who heads NIST there, a very powerful man. I was encouraged by some of the words and deeds, and while there's a long way to go yet, we are making progress at advancing human rights, religious freedom, and reducing their role in terror in the Republic of the Sudan. Is that a fair assessment?
That is.
And so would you say that's a success story of this administration on foreign policy?
Partial success, yes.
Sure, there's a lot left to do. And so you've also spoken to the reduction in funds as it relates to successive programs on small scales, things like school feeding programs and water purifications in villages, correct?
The need for those and the small scale programs are the most effective.
It's a lot easier to lose money when we spend lots of it than it is when we address a specific issue, correct?
Well said.
Okay, and so I've been a champion of things like school feeding programs. I would point out and ask you if you agree that there's a reduction in long-term radicalization where we see women get educations. Is that an accurate statement?
I don't think anybody could deny that.
And there's an increase in economic achievement where we see school feeding programs and articulate, educated women as well, correct?
I would think so.
And these are things like McGovern-Dole feeding programs that aren't massive programs, but that we should spread out as small programs. They work, right?
Yes.
Okay, so this is just a history for me. I spoke briefly earlier of Arthur Vandenberg. Are you familiar with Arthur Vandenberg?
I am.
Okay, and so you're aware that Mr. Vandenberg was the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and was running against Truman, we thought, when he was encouraged to attack Mr. Truman on foreign policy matters. You familiar with the story?
I am.
And Mr. Vandenberg said, I simply won't do that because politics should stop at the water's edge.
Yes.
Okay. I am disheartened by the fact that that doesn't appear to be the case today. I was taken aback and, in fact, wrote down the words verbatim of a member previously who said, and I quote, wherever you go, anywhere in the world, people from State pull you aside and tell you how upset they are, how they feel like the administration is really going after State Department. Did you hear that testimony earlier? Does that sound familiar?
I believe a member said that, yes.
Okay. What I would submit is that this is actually the State Department going after the administration. So let me ask you this. The people in State who are complaining that the administration is going after them, who elected them?
Employees at the State Department or Civil Service and Foreign Service.
So they're not elected by the people of the United States. And who are they held accountable to?
They're held accountable to the Secretary.
And he works for?
The President of the United States.
Okay. And is policymaking vested in the individuals who complain about how they're being treated by the administration?
They're
not policymakers, correct? They're executioners of policy?
It's hard for me to answer that because they're defining who a policymaker is.
Well, I'll submit this. I wore the uniform of the United States military for a number of years, and oftentimes I was told to do things that I didn't necessarily agree with on my ideological scale, but so long as they were lawful orders that didn't violate the international laws governing the actions of military force, I executed those orders without complaining to members of Congress when they showed up, say, for example, in the dining facility at Camp Doble in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And so I would ask you if you would be willing to convey to the members of the State Department that they were not elected, that they are not policymakers, that they are executioners of policy, and so long as the policy that they're asked to execute does not violate international laws, that they should do their jobs or find some other place to go. Now, I say that with respect and regard to the fine professional individuals from the State Department who helped me extract 9 Christian refugees from the Republic of the Sudan earlier this year. There are wonderful people at State. But when an administration changes, it is not your job to grab us by the sleeve and complain that you don't think the president's treating you well. It is your job, as Tennyson said, to do your job. And finally, are you familiar with the statement made earlier in this hearing where an individual said it seems to be a Republican obsession with abortion? Do you recall that line of questioning?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. I would submit that perhaps it's not an obsession with abortion, but an obsession with protecting the preeminent God-given human right, which is the right to life. And I would submit that the obsession is on the part of those who believe that U.S. foreign policy hinges on funding abortions of people in the developing world. And so, candidly, I thank you for the good work you're doing. I appreciate the progress we're making in places like the Republic of Sudan. I appreciate the great help that we've received from people in the State Department. But if you don't agree with the policy coming out of the administration, please convey that to the members of the staff that might disagree. They should run for president. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.